Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Cheeks III from High Point PD in North Carolina. Really looking forward to this conversation. Wellness is something that is a huge priority to him and his organization. So welcome to the show, Chief Cheeks III. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to it. We got to know each other a little bit offline, and I really appreciate your passion for wellness and the things that you've done organizationally. But I was hoping that we could first start with a little bit of background. So anyone who's listening who doesn't know who you are, maybe give us some insight.
Okay. Well, wellness is not something that just kind of started for me. I was a high school athlete, fortunate enough to receive a scholarship to continue to play sports in college. I ran track and field for 4 years as a scholarship athlete. Continued to compete a little bit after my college career, and during my professional career, I was a PT instructor. I'm still a certified PT instructor here for the department. So working out, the wellness, that's been kind of part of my lifestyle now for quite some time, since I was a teenager, really. So getting into this job, and obviously with the demands of the job, that's something that you try to keep with you. But it's not uncommon to hear the stories of what people used to be and what they are, as they get 15, 20 years in. So I'm from North Carolina originally, born and raised in Winston-Salem, which is about 20 to 30 minutes away from High Point. And so I'm a local guy. My family is here in this area. I raised now my son and live with my wife, obviously, in this triad area. So I'm really homegrown guy, left a little bit to go to college and stuff, and he came back to the area.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm curious, you said that you were a college athlete. How do you think that shaped your views on performance and longevity as you entered into your professional life? Because you said this you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I talked to a lot of chiefs that are like, yeah, wellness really wasn't a thing when I first started. And because you come from that background, do you think you had a different perspective that you were able to share with others?
Well, I think some of the biggest things I got from my time as an athlete was the teamwork and the discipline aspect. The teamwork aspect, we talk about that a lot in law enforcement. But when you're part of an athletic team, that is, that's the truest definition of being on a team, having a common goal, but more importantly, the accountability part is there. How you are training, how you are preparing mentally. If you're ready for that moment of competition, there are other individuals that are depending on you to be at your best, regardless of the situation or circumstance in the athletic contest. Well, law enforcement is not too far from that.
Yeah.
If I come in for a shift and I have a cold, or I'm just not feeling it well, my leg is sore, whatever the case may be, we get that call for service. There's someone depending on us to do something for them. So that really kind of resonated with me. It's something I carried with me through my career. Early on in my career, I applied for it and was transferred to our narcotics unit. And so doing entries and things like that, where, again, you are in very dangerous situations with a group of individuals you work with every day, their families. We're depending on each other. We're depending on each other to have each other's back. But there is a physical element to that as well. Making sure, again, we're able to perform not only for ourselves, but for each other as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you said physically, but you also said mentally. And, I've had this conversation before, and maybe you can relate to this a little bit, but there are tons of documentaries that have come out about professional athletes, right? We have wide receiver and quarterback and all these different Netflix. And the one thing that I see in those is what you said is how can there be that preparedness, not just physically, but also mentally, especially when you're under pressure and you're in these high stakes situation where you're right. Not only is your team counting on you, but the community or your fans, we can kind of like relate those, like everyone else is like, looking for you, to be able to operate in that elite level as well. And that's a part of professional athleticism. That's something that just comes with it. It's like, okay, how can we make sure that physically you're mobile, you're strong, you have that endurance. We can reduce the risk of injury as much as possible because you're the most valuable asset. And if you're injured and you're out for a season, like everything else suffers. But then also mentally, how can we have nervous system regulation so that you can make effective decisions under pressure? So I really appreciate that you said both the physical and the mental, but then also like, how can you, because the one thing that I hear a lot is, law enforcement's so good at helping others, but sometimes forgets about themselves. But if you're saying, hey, in order for me to be there for others, to be there for my team, to be there for my community, I have to take care of myself. That's the only option. And so if you are a part of a team and you have that team mentality, you almost have to start with yourself first.
Well, part of our culture, and it still is to some extent, but one of the things we're working on here to change is that part of police culture that said, you must come in, you must be perfect, don't show any flaws, you don't need any downtime. When I started, that was the mantra, if you will, of being a law enforcement officer. And you didn't learn to process or deal with anything. You just knew that, hey, my responsibility from what I'm being, taught is to power through it. There's been plenty of studies, experience that's taught us that that's not the best way to effectively function both on and off duty over the course of, here in North Carolina, it's 30 years to retirement.
Right.
And so how do we prepare our folks to be the best version of themselves for a 30-year career, not only on duty, but when they go home as well? Because when you look at divorce rates, alcohol use, prescription drugs, things like that, that when you take a deep dive into how officers are coping with, the stress and the things they're exposed to here at work, we have to take that comprehensive approach and get into our culture that, yes, you will see some things that are not normal. They are high stress things, but there are effective ways to cope. There are ways to manage and deal with those things to where your career lasts and you're long, but also that you can enjoy the time you're spending with your family. And sometimes it's just as simple as it's okay to take a vacation. One of the things I hope that my staff understands is I'm a proponent for scheduling time off and taking a vacation. And that's not just something I'm willing to say. Everyone here knows at least once a year I take an international trip. Now, part of that is like, man, I hope everything goes okay while I'm gone. But at the end of the day, I know just as much as anyone, I need a few days to unplug and just kind of recharge and take a step away from from the emails, the stress, the worry, things of that nature. And I want our staff to realize that they need to do that as well.
Yeah, there's actually a few things that you said that I really kind of want to dive into. But the first part of this idea of perfection, I think is a really interesting conversation because I'm guilty of this too. I think that when you want to be the best, you don't want to give the perception that you're not perfect. But that doesn't mean that beneath the surface, there aren't things going on. So I think it's really interesting to say, hey, like, these things don't bother me. But then underneath, what are you doing? Are you angry? Are you lashing out on your family? Are you choosing unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcoholism or overspending? Or are you just completely like disconnecting and like binge watching Netflix because you're trying to avoid life? What does that look like? And so a lot of times I don't think that Um, when we talk about perfection, just because you're giving the perception of perfection on the outside doesn't mean that that's the reality. Right. So
Right.
I think for a lot of people, it's that they're just trying to maintain that perception as much as they can. And they're like holding on, for dear life so that no one else thinks that they're struggling. But is that the best version of yourself? Does that mean that you're not strong? No. That means that you need some of those things to offload. And I love that you mentioned a few things that work for you, one of which is just unplugging, disconnecting, having a few days to just reset and breathe. And I think that we underestimate the value of having that space. And I'm a yes person. I love to say yes to everything. And I've had to learn throughout my life and my career that I have to set boundaries for myself if I'm going to be able to show up in a way that I really want to. I don't want to give someone the exhausted, angry, stressed, sad version of myself. I want to be able to show up to the best of my ability. And a lot of times that means having those opportunities to just be, whether that's a vacation or an hour throughout the day where you're focusing on wellness for yourself, to be able to just reset everything and compose yourself and then move forward in a more productive way.
And you think about, the last 5 or 6 years in law enforcement, we've gone through COVID, civil unrest, staffing crises as a result of those two things. And yet the need or demand for law enforcement services has not changed.
Mm.
So a lot of agencies, mine included, we've been doing the same job and dealing with new problems as they've come along with less staff than we had, 5 or 6 years ago. And so, we put the demand on our folks to show up and perform. But again, we also have to worry about, the burnout and the things that come from that. And that's part of what shaped our wellness program was, hey, we do the physicals, right? What have we been doing in the past? We send you, you get a physical, and then what? Do we offer any resources or avenues for you to take those numbers and look and say, how and why, where do I get better?
Mm.
We didn't even really touch the mental side. So now our staff has the physical appointment, but there's a mental wellness appointment. And the difference between the two is the mental wellness appointment is to make sure that they have healthy coping mechanisms and skills, and they know every resource that's provided, not only by us as a department, but the city, the state. If there's an 800 number out there that's free for law enforcement, we have all those things listed on a document that they receive after their wellness appointment to make sure that they're aware. So when they go through those moments, they at least have a resource to go to and say, hey, I don't want to go in and talk to someone, but maybe I'll use this app, or maybe I'll call this number, or maybe the peer support team is what I need right now, or I want to reach out to a chaplain. Anything that helps them kind of navigate again the challenges of what all comes with this job and with this career. The physical appointment, if you have your own primary care physician, you can opt out of that physical appointment. The wellness appointment is mandatory.
Mm.
Everyone, including myself, does a wellness appointment. And when we rolled this out to the agency, I sat in front of the first group of officers that were going to be up for this appointment. And I told them, here's what it is, here's what it is not. And I can tell you that not based off of the description from the entity providing it, but because I went through the very first one, and here's my result sheet for you all to look at. And you can see it doesn't tell me your favorite color or that you sleep with a teddy bear at night. Because as cops, that's what we think.
Right.
I'm going to lay on the couch. They're going to make me hold a doll and talk about that time in the fifth grade or, something. We draw all kinds of things
Sure.
in our head. But all it tells me is that they attended and that there were no obvious barriers that we need to have further addressed. And again, one of the biggest signs of success we've seen from that is haven't had pushback from anyone attending, especially as word has gotten out of, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. But then we have had some staff that they've gone through some experiences, whether work related or not, and they've come in and said, can I go and talk to that same person I talked to for my wellness appointment?
Yeah.
And so it lets me know that what we're doing again has a purpose.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you said earlier is, how can you put in place resources and opportunities so that there is quality and longevity in your life? And you had said that you want them to be the best versions of themselves. And, I've said this a few times on this podcast, but I think that a lot of the conversation is like, how can we just get people to survive this career? And in this conversation that we're having now, but also the one that we had offline, it was all about how can we help everyone thrive, not just survive. Like, we want that quality. We want you to like have a happier, healthier life for yourself and your family, so that when you do reach the end of this, you have a long and successful retirement too, and you are okay physically and mentally at the end of everything. And, one of the things that you had told me before is that you had, really recognize that there wasn't really preventative measures in place, and you were kind of looking at how things were done and now starting to revamp what your wellness program looks like. And I know you talked about the physical appointment and the mental, and I think that having someone come back to you and say, hey, can I do that again, is a huge ROI right there. Like that's what you're looking for is, how can you encourage that initial first step for wellness? Because sometimes that's the hardest, like you said, there's like that resistance or that fear of what's going to happen. But once you get that initial first step, then it's a ripple effect, right? People are talking about how this has helped them. They're wanting to seek out more resources. And I know that you've completely revamped your whole wellness program to be able to offer a lot of different things. So if and when you're team needs them, they have them. Are you able to maybe give us some insights into some of the things that you've done, but then also how you've done it? Because I talked to a lot of chiefs that are really struggling with like where to start. How do you know even like where that jumping off point is? How do you afford it? How do you bake that into your budget? How do you get buy-in? How do you build that trust in that culture so that people are taking advantage of these things? If there's anything that you can share, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you one of the things that probably inspired me the most is when you look at, and this is not just our agency, but numerous agencies, that 5, 10, 15-year guy or girl who has a pretty successful career. Traditionally, they're not in any significant trouble at all. And then you have that thing or that moment that as a leader you have to deal with, because now it's related to either a significant policy violation or, in worst case, violation of law.
Mm.
You have to deal with that. In some cases, it results in dismissal of that person. But then when you really sit back and you look at it, you think, well, what did we miss?
Mm.
All of a sudden, how do we go from that person that shows up at work and, takes specialty assignments and things like that, and then we are on the worst end of the spectrum? Because you always think about that person that slowly transitions into being a problem or having problems. But when it's more sudden, you get really, if you're reflecting, if you're thinking about, retention, it's, what did we miss?
Yeah.
And when we get to that point of those significant problems, we have to deal with those. So for me, it was, what can we do within reason, obviously, to kind of take a different approach to try to prevent that from happening. If we have to take corrective action to get someone back on track, I'd much rather that than to end someone's career because we've now gotten to the worst end of the spectrum. So one of the things I did was we have a local organization, the FMRT group. They specialize in providing physical and mental health services to first responders, mainly law enforcement, but they also work with, fire and EMS as well. One of the things we're notoriously bad at in law enforcement is we try to do everything here in house, right? Mm-hmm. And so looking at an entity like that, realizing, hey, they specialize in this. Well, there's no need for me to take an online class and try to provide some service when we have, someone out here that specializes in it. They have over 30 clinicians who can address different or various issues that the staff may have. So we started a conversation with them, talking to their higher ups. Hey, here's what we're looking at doing. They fully explained some of the programming and things that they have, in place that were an option. Second, you look at how do we roll this out? Mm-hmm. And like I told you, I'm a big proponent for if I'm going to ask people to do it, I've got to be willing to do it myself. And so it was, okay, you've explained this to me, put me through one so I can see what this experience is. It'll make it much easier. Now, they also were willing to come in and get in front of our staff and they kind of explain. But in that situation, I felt like it was better for me to at least make the first attempt at it. And after that first initial conversation, I felt pretty good about, okay, we're trending in the right direction. There were some questions, but there was no, conflict or pushback.
Yeah.
Then you go to the next hurdle of, well, how do we pay for it? The first thing I did was examine our existing budget. And I found some things here and there that we were doing that wasn't accomplishing what we wanted to have accomplished. So we were able to shift some monies around in our existing budget and enter into a contract with FMRT to establish the annual appointments and the wellness appointments. I then set up a second line for different services such as counseling and some other services, like, for instance, they do fit for duty evaluations, both physical and mental, post-deployment evaluations. So if I have someone come back who's been deployed with the military for over a year, well, we could send them in to be evaluated before we just thrust them back, into their duty assignment. So they do some other services as well. Have a different line in the budget set up to evaluate those things. And by separating them, it allows me to see, hey, do we need to increase this line over here because maybe we use more counseling services than we anticipated. And then another thing we implemented with them is a critical incident exposure appointment. And so if we have a murder suicide, not only our sworn staff, but our crime lab and the folks that are spending hours on that scene, processing that, we're able to send them not only for the initial appointment, but there's a built-in follow-up appointment as part of that as well. Because initially, you may be able to say, hey, I'm fine, but then as time goes on, that may be something that weighs on that individual. So looking at it again comprehensively in steps. And then the next phase for me was, well, we're a 24/7, 365 operation. Again, do we continue to try to facilitate part of that wellness here in house? If the answer is yes, who's better equipped to do it? Mm-hmm. So I took a position, a vacant sworn position, and I converted it for a wellness coordinator. We've onboarded her. She works obviously specifically with law enforcement staff, but she doesn't have to reinvent the wheel for the mental wellness aspect of it because we have an entity that takes care of that. So she can focus now more on the things like the sleep, the physical exercise, mobility, the workout classes, helping officers with rehabilitation after an injury or prepping them before they have surgery, when they're unfortunately hurt here at work. So She's been onboarded. She's done a fantastic job. She's also, set up some other things that we didn't have in place before. So now every Monday, a meal prep service they deliver here to the police department. Staff can put in their order. They deliver here. She meets them. She stores their orders until they come get them because we have a full floor police department. And then we have some staff that's off site, but they deliver it here to the main building. Staff can come get it. But if you work third shift, now we eliminate that excuse of when nothing's open other than the fast food restaurants. She does the educational classes of, hey, here's why these things are better for you to eat and drink than these other things. I talked about the wellness classes and the fitness classes, the tactical yoga classes, because if you put tactical in front of it, sounds cool.
100%.
Cops will buy into it. But again, having someone who can dedicate their time to doing that, and then also facilitating those external resources for us, has been huge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know we kind of have a 50-50 listening audience. One is the younger generation who's looking for inspiration, but the other half is other leaders across the country who are like, how are you doing it? And so I really appreciate you sharing step by step how you were able to accomplish this. And one of the things that I've learned throughout my life and in my career is meeting people where they are. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, is saying, hey, like, here's some healthier options for you. Or, hey, how can we make it easier and we can remove some of those hurdles? So, recognizing that, yes, we understand that you're working graves. Like, we know that you're working night shift. How can we make it easier for you to eat healthier? Here's what we can do. Or, hey, like, I know you're tight. How can we, say tactical XYZ so that we can get your buy-in, and then we can, make sure that you're taking advantage of these resources. So like I said before, I think that the more you can meet people where they are and you can present it in a way that explains the why. You said that earlier, like, why are these things better? Why are these things important? But then also eliminating the hurdles that everyone is seeing so that they have the best opportunity to be able to take advantage.
That's the advantage to having the right staff, because our wellness coordinator, Skylar, that's what she's done such a great job at, is we've got people at all different fitness levels that participate in the classes she offers. So it's not just the people that haven't worked out in a while. It's not just the people that are already in shape. Those classes are a mix. And, she's able to encourage those folks new to that activity to continue to come, to get better, but also challenge the ones that are in better shape. It's encouraging for everyone involved, and the room's not split. They're united in that common goal. If that's me or someone else trying to do that, it's, hey, here's what everybody should be doing. If you can't do this many reps, then there's a problem, because that's typically how we've done things in law enforcement. Is, here's the standard, meet the standard. If you can't meet the standard, figure it out, but get to this standard. She's able to meet people where they are, which is, again, shows the benefit, I think, of not trying to do everything in-house, getting the right people in place to do those things for you.
Well, and I appreciate you said both sides of it, because again, like, how can we eliminate excuses or pushback, right? And so if you have people who are really in shape and the only classes that are offered or resources that are offered are for beginners and they're like really, really easy, then they're going to be like, well, it's too easy for me, so I'm not going to do it. And then vice versa. If there's someone, no one wants to feel like they're new at something or that they are not good at something. And I think especially as we get older, like, I remember when I was younger, maybe you can relate to this. When I was younger, like, I didn't have as much like maybe anxiety or embarrassment about like learning new things. And like, falling and getting back up, and
Right.
I had more of that, I think, motivation to get better. And I think as we get older, we kind of lose that a little bit. Like, we don't want to be the person in the room that like sucks at something, especially when everyone's looking at you. And so I think that if you can also meet people who are new where they are, and like you said, have that encouragement and create a safe space where it's like, hey, and it goes back to what we said earlier, we're a team. Like, everyone in here like is a team. We're all trying to just get better. And wherever that starting point is, doesn't matter. It's how can we all improve ourselves from where we are today to get incrementally better every day. And what does that look like? And I think as soon as we can start looking, at our peers and the people around us as equals and as a team, then we have less of that stigma, less of that judgment, creating more of that safe space for everybody to grow and to raise that bar to improve themselves.
I agree.
You had told me a really interesting kind of pilot that you had ran about doing a 4-day work week. And I wanted to see if you could explain this, because when you said that, I was like, it's really interesting. And then the feedback that you got from this was also really interesting. What did you do, and what was the feedback that you got from it?
So prior to me leaving to attend the FBI National Academy, I asked my wellness coordinator I said, hey, let's do a test group of professional staff. These are our non-sworn folks. Let's pick a group of about 6 to 8, and let's ask them to consider a 4-day work week. They would work either obviously Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday, but the caveat would be at least 2 days of that week, they have to spend an hour on each of those 2 days on wellness time. And that's part of the deal. So naturally, wasn't hard to get people to say, well, absolutely, I'll try that out, because now I have a 3-day weekend. I was gone for 10 weeks. I come back. So I wanted to meet with that group and kind of evaluate and see, positives, negatives, before we even potentially consider rolling this out. Because I've got 61 total professional staff personnel. So if we're going to look at implementing this wide range, what are all the things we need to consider? Does it work? Do they like it? Do they not like it? Things of that nature. I expected positive feedback, but some of the feedback I would have never thought of. Excuse me. Some of our staff, one said, listen, I only did this for the 4-day work week. That was enough to get me in there, even though I wasn't sure how I would feel about these group workouts and things of that nature. But what they found was, number one, physically, they started liking the fact that, hey, I'm going in and I'm pushing myself with a group of people. Two, the accountability and consistency, because now the conversation through the halls was, are you coming to class today? Are you coming to class today? And then the other part, the unintended part was, this employee said, hey, there's some mental health benefits for me as well, to where they were talking to the therapist they go to. The therapist is like, hey, this has been good for you because it's gotten you out of your comfort zone. I don't know if it was anxiety or things like that, but there were, it was kind of twofold for them as far as how it helped them and encouraged them to continue on. Another employee shared, hey, the 2 days was great, but they've been coming to make sure they get at least 3 days in. So things like that are very, very encouraging. One of our employees had been here over 20 years, and she said this is the single best thing that has been offered to professional staff in her career here.
Wow.
Now, obviously, sometimes you take that with a grain of salt, but I know that this person would be honest. They're not just saying that because I'm sitting there as the chief asking, hey, how was this? But that's the kind of feedback, again, that gives you authentic verification, if you will, to doing something like that. So our next goal or move here in the near future, of course, is to roll that out to all professional staff to make sure, obviously, one, we're providing same level of service. But if we can accomplish something that people care about on the external side, which is, hey, how do I make the same salary, get the work done, but extend my weekend a little bit longer? And then two, again, one of the professional staff members said, how can I not work out now? You've eliminated my excuse of I'm tired when I get home or I don't have time, because I can do it while I'm here at work, and I'm not penalized for the fact that hey, you took a lunch break and now in the latter part of the day you're going to work out. Now, like anything else, implementation and then the guidance of implementation is important. One of the things I explained to our test group is, hey, listen, I still want you to go eat lunch, but let's make sure we're not taking a 2-hour lunch and then you're going for an hour working out, because now we've significantly shrunk our work day down, and it's going to make it harder for you to be efficient. But that's part of, we're managing adults, right? We set clear standards and expectations, and there's a level of accountability for that as well. But it's things like that of trying to think outside the box. How do we best implement this? But also, how do we encourage folks to be involved in something like this?
Yeah, I find that to be so interesting. I have had a lot of conversations with chiefs across the country, and I've never heard a pilot program like that before. And the fact that you're getting the feedback that you did of people saying, wow, I love this. Like, I feel better. I get more time off. And we talked about this before, like, how can you unplug and disconnect? So incentivizing them with more time off, but then also creating community and culture. And like you said, eliminating the hurdles of time. And I think anyone who's listening can relate to this. Like, when you feel better physically, you feel better mentally. And when you feel better mentally, your productivity is better. The way you show up is better. Your sick time is less, and so by encouraging everyone to do 2 hours a week of wellness time, now you're improving morale, mood, productivity, and you're reducing sick time and absenteeism. So I'd be interested to see kind of what those metrics are over time when you roll this out, and if you are seeing a direct correlation with that. My question is, do you think that this would ever be possible to roll out a similar type of program and structure with sworn personnel?
So our sworn staff is a little bit different. One of the things, with them, especially if they are an investigative unit, things like that, they've always had that schedule flexibility in a lot of regards. But I will tell you, we do have, some sworn staff that are participating in these classes.
Mm-hmm.
Even some of our patrol folks that, while they can't make it to the scheduled classes, they're utilizing our wellness coordinator, whether it's, nutrition planning, whether it's workout planning, preventive maintenance, if you will. So she's doing, kind of one-on-one workouts and counseling. So we're still, seeing the benefits of that on the individual level as well. Our patrol, especially, is a little more difficult just because of. But we already, and we have now for several years prior to me becoming chief, have offered the ability for patrol to check out a service and work out on duty, provided that the city's not on fire. So they kind of had a roundabout way to go at that, but we had never looked at encouraging some of the people who are, for all intents and purposes, kind of stuck in the building, very sedentary, just by nature of you've got to be sitting in front of a computer to do your job. So And we've always tried to figure out different ways to incorporate, things for the sworn staff. Um, some of our professional staff that leave the building, like crime scene, things like that. Previously, they weren't included in physicals.
Mm,
They are now. They weren't included in wellness appointments. They are now.
yeah.
So again, trying to make sure that when we talk about comprehensive wellness, we're including everyone to some degree in this building. I
Yeah.
look at our wellness program or initiatives, if you will, really kind of like a 7-pronged approach or 7 pillars, if you will. And that's the spiritual aspect, training and development, that's family health, financial health, the physical part, the mental part, and then the health and safety part. So some of that stuff is coming through, policy and things like that. But the other parts, especially the mental wellness, the physical wellness, and the financial piece are the ones we as an agency definitely needed to and I wanted us to get better with.
Yeah. I have two questions for you, and we can do one at a time. And, if you forget one of them, let me know and I can repeat it. But one of the conversations I have a lot with chiefs is, and maybe one of the like things that's holding leadership back from implementing some of these things is this question of like, well, how do we know that people are going to use it in advance? How do we know that there's buy-in and that there's participation before we've put our limited funds into this? And it sounds like to me, you implemented these things without maybe knowing exactly how many people were going to use it. And you were willing to do that and put in the effort to build the program from the ground up. And now you have that engagement and that receptiveness. And so, what advice would you have for other leaders who are maybe, I wouldn't say afraid, but maybe like hesitant to invest in some of these things because we know if we ask people, hey, are you going to do tactical yoga? Like maybe people are not going to raise their hand. Or if you put out a survey, like maybe people they don't know what they don't know,
Right.
before they do it. What advice would you have for leaders who are maybe, hesitant to invest money into something where they don't know if it's going to be used? And my second question is, you specifically, run a larger organization. How do you get that messaging out to where everyone does feel supported and knows about it? What does that effort look like with you and your leadership team?
Well, to go back to your first question, I would point out 2 things, and I think this reigns true for every police agency. First thing I would point out is I would say, take a look at how much it costs you every time you replace an employee.
Mm,
That's civilian or sworn. That 2, 5, 8, 10, 12-year person that walks out of their position. Now we have to go through the hiring process. We have to get them up to some proficient level of training. And don't let it be a person who was very experienced that had some advanced training. So what's your return on investment potentially in that regard? And the second thing is about every 7 years, we replace our firearms. There's something out there that's new, latest and greatest, but every officer I have is not shooting or firing their firearm in the line of duty. And we're making that financial commitment. It's not cheap to replace those. We're buying equipment or technology that, again, there may be, a certain percentage of your agency that will use that, but you don't know how effective it's going to be until you jump through that hoop. So, it's the same thing here. Sometimes as leaders, we have to look at, kind of look at the evidence. What's the evidence telling us? Our strategies for crime fighting are based off of, or should be based off of, what the data is telling us. Where do we need to be? How do we need to reasonably approach this issue or this problem? How can we be proactive and prevent these things from happening? That data kind of points you in the same direction when it comes to your agency when you're talking about health and wellness, for your staff. Again, look at the disciplinary issues, look at the troubles and the problems not only that your people are having, but that you're hearing in the hallways. If you're hearing things in the hallway that give you concern as a leader, again, you can hope that it never comes across your desk, or you can say, hey, what can we reasonably do? And how do we, approach addressing that? So those are probably the two biggest things I would say to leaders of, hey, look at it from these two, perspectives. And I think, again, it's finding, what's that approach that fits, my agency, for the size that we're at. If you're 12 or 15, people, maybe you don't jump through these same hoops that we have. Maybe you partner with a larger agency that's nearby. But I think there's always, something we can do to have in place for the benefit of our staff.
Yeah.
The second part, or the second question, as far as the messaging of the buy-in, and then there's certain things that as a leader you're trying to get out, policy. You send out an email, or it comes through at a higher level command meeting. And then there's other things that it's worth the time of either me or the executive staff hitting our lineups, getting in front of our investigations during their monthly meeting, and kind of again rolling that out, explaining the why, making sure people kind of understand. And I'll tell you strategically, when it was time, for our first round, I picked the group that I picked to start with on purpose. It involved second shift patrol and investigations. Second shift patrol sees the widest range of different types of calls, and then investigations are more of your experienced folks who, everything from robbery, homicide to special victims unit, to just some of those investigative units, property crimes, things of that nature. If you can roll something out, answer the questions for those folks, if things go as you anticipate they go well, they're your ambassadors. They're the ones that when the next wave hears about these things, they say, "Hey, I've already done that. It is actually what they're telling us is going to be." Or, no, the chief sat in front of us and he answered these questions. Or they can come back and say, "Well, I've got some follow-up questions," and they feel comfortable approaching it because they know they'll get an answer from you. So, open communication ahead of time, is key. And then, making sure again that you kind of fully explain what this is. The wellness appointment, what was big on that was making sure that they understood that it was not a evaluation of them. Hey, this is a conversation, and the purpose of this conversation is to make sure you have healthy, mechanisms and habits in place to make you aware of things that are offered, and to have for this person who is trained to have a conversation with you to where they have some suggestions based off of whatever you choose to talk about it and the topics of discussion. They can point you in the right direction. Versus, again, I think how people think about a lot of times, am I going to have to lay on the couch and just divulge my deep, dark secrets?
Right.
Just making sure they understood that that's not what that is. And if you send out an email trying to explain that, it's open to interpretation versus, if I'm standing there in front of you as a group and I say it and you're a little fuzzy on what I mean by that, you can immediately ask. And not only do you get my response, but that entire room hears that explanation.
Yeah. I love everything you just said. Boots on the ground efforts, having effective communication, getting in front of people, trying to identify maybe what some of the fears are and being able to talk and speak to that in a way where there isn't anything that's lost in translation. Because I see it all the time. I get 200 emails a day, and sometimes the tone or, whatever it is that you're trying to convey gets lost. So getting in front of people, answering those questions. I really like that you said strategically, you try to go maybe start with people who have some of the biggest challenges or who are maybe the most resistant. What I have found in my career is that patrol is oftentimes the hardest to kind of get on board with some of those things. And for you to say, hey, we're going to start here. And then if we can make believers and get buy-in out of this particular group, then everything else is going to be easier because they're going to be the canaries, is what I've heard. Like they're going to go and talk about it. And I love that they're your ambassadors, is what you had said. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm sure everyone who's listening does too. My final question before we wrap for the day is for the younger generation. Maybe if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, brand new to this job, what words of wisdom would you share? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Wow, that's a great question. I think, especially looking back at experience now, I think the biggest thing, that I would tell a younger person getting into it now or my younger self is that you will hear a lot of noise, but find solid, reliable voices. And what I mean by that is there are people, whether they're professionals, whether they're family, friends, coworkers, there are people that can help you navigate the challenges of not only your career, but of life itself. Because when I started this job, I was 22 years old. I'm a much different person now at 45 than I was at 22. But you're growing along the way. Those voices that I had, whether they were, again, in any of those groups I just named, those are the important things that help me navigate safely to where I am now. Sometimes that noise gets in, and especially now with social media and through blogs and things like that, that noise gets in, and that noise is detrimental to family life, to your mental health and wellness. Sometimes it can be detrimental from a career standpoint because it elicits an emotional response, and so that would probably be my biggest thing is, make sure you find those voices, those reliable voices, because again, they may be from external sources as well, and try to ignore and stay above the noise.
Thank you. Great words of wisdom. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for coming on here and spending some time with me. Yeah, I appreciate it. And if there's anything else I missed, I'll kind of give you the floor to sign off. But again, thank you so much.
Well, I'll add, kind of a final thing, because again, I know part of your audience are law enforcement leaders. My ideas, the concepts here, I just didn't come up with 100% on my own. A big part of it was looking at, what are agencies doing? Louisville Metro PD, they have a very robust wellness program. San Diego PD, New York PD, but they're significantly larger than us. It's, what are we doing in other law enforcement agencies? And then how do we scale that down to our agency and make sure it's sustainable? That we're not just doing that one time, program or thing. And so my challenge to those leaders out there is, look at what people are doing around you or even outside of your region or scope, and just kind of figure out the best way of implementation for you, because, your agency will benefit, brother.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and thank you everyone who's listening, and we'll see you again next time.